Hi, my name is Compton Rambada. I am the Chief Visionary Officer for Ophora Water. I also have a company called Ascended Health based in Salt Lake City, and we make our probiotics through Ophora Water. And I've gotten some amazing results. And when we were invited to come into Ophora to kind of like test the effects of Ophora Water, and I suggested that we do the effects using body composition analysis, and we look at the effects on plants, and then we also look at the effects on the growth of actual microbes in solution using the water versus regular filtered water. So about 4 weeks ago, we used a human subject, and what we did is we invited a subject that was not necessarily not healthy. We used a very healthy subject, figuring that if we use this water on a very healthy subject and we had effects on a very healthy subject, it would most likely translate to having effects on a not so healthy subject. Comparable to having like a nice gasoline and using that gasoline on a Ferrari versus a 1967 Chevy. And if we were to have this gasoline have an effect on the performance of a Ferrari or a muscle car, it would most likely have an effect on a car that's much older. So in this test, we invited a professional athlete. She was actually a professional soccer player. She's in her mid-30s, in very good shape. And we invited her to come soak in Ophora water because we've had anecdotal tests that Ophora water greatly increases the energy of a person soaking in Ophora water. And then we've also had anecdotal tests of people just drinking Ophora water and getting increases in energy. And in addition, many people have found that they started losing weight. Again, anecdotal evidence, we don't have any idea why they're losing weight, but they were losing weight nonetheless. And furthermore, people have been pounding down the doors of Ophora to soak in their waters because they were feeling health benefits. Now, I'm not here to claim any health benefits, and this video is not at all any video that is saying that this water has any health benefits. I'm just telling you that there is anecdotal evidence showing that people with certain health projects, as I would call them, becoming better after soaking in Ophora water and drinking with Ophora water. So this test that we did with this professional athlete, now retired, but still keeping in good shape with Ophora water, was she came in and we invited her to soak in the water for 30 minutes, drink the water after she soaked, and then wait for 3 hours. And what we did is we tested her blood oxygen levels of her water before she came in, right after she did the spa after 30 minutes soaking, and then right after she drank the water, 32, like a whole liter of water, she drank that. We tested her blood oxygen levels after that. And then we waited for 3 hours and we tested her blood oxygen levels then. And we were using this intravenous transcutaneous oxygen measuring system from Germany, a highly specific non-invasive oxygen measuring tool, and we were actually measuring her blood oxygen levels in water. And in addition, what we did is we wanted to measure what effects it had with her body composition. And what body composition is this measuring device which basically pulses electrical energy into the body, and it bounces electrical energy against the cells of the body. And with the cells of the energy, if it bounces quicker and how fast it bounces, it can actually measure like your body fat. It measures how much body mass you have in terms of muscle mass, lean muscle mass, and skeletal muscle mass. And more importantly, in terms of this study, it measured the amount of water that your body has. And the amount of water is actually in the cell and outside the cell. So the amount of water that's intracellular versus the amount of water that's extracellular, and the total amount of water is very important in this study. And we hope to find that this Ophora water had a great effect in the water going inside your body, but even had a better effect of the water going inside the cell versus going outside the cell, because as you know, the water inside the cell determines how well your cell functions. And we're finding that people that are in chronic dehydration status, most of the time, people are constantly dehydrated because the water, even though you're drinking enough water, it's in the extracellular environment. It's actually outside the cell. So this device, this body composition analyzer that we use, actually showed that the water was actually properly going inside the cell and not just going into the body extracellularly. So when we looked at the effect of blood oxygen levels on this athlete, when she first came in, the baseline oxygen level was at 71 millimeters mercury. And you can see that she soaked for 30 minutes and she came back with a 30% increase in blood oxygen, which is, I found, quite interesting. I won't say remarkable because I'm not a physician and I don't know what the increases are, but certainly she felt a lot more alive and a lot more energetic. And we found an increase in oxygen level by 30%, and that could result in an increase in energy. And so she took a liter of Ophora hyperoxygenated water and she drank that. It took her about 5 minutes to drink, and we measured her oxygen levels again inside her blood. And sure enough, there was an increase of oxygen by about 6%, so a total increase before she started the bath of a 30% increase in oxygen. And then we waited for 3 hours. She didn't do anything. She just waited for 3 hours, and we measured her oxygen blood concentration after 3 hours. And sure enough, there was still a 30% increase in blood oxygen after 3 hours, which then I found quite remarkable. Because even if you get a hyperbaric treatment of oxygen, what I've found is as most people's blood oxygen levels aren't increased after 3 hours, they're usually back down to normal levels after about an hour. But with the soaking of this water and the drinking of this water, we found an increase stabilized even after 3 hours. So after we looked at the blood oxygen levels of this athlete, I wanted to look at the effect on body composition. And as you see here on this screen, we're using a body composition analyzer. In fact, we're using the one that's considered to be the highest and most efficient body composition analysis by the US government, and it's called an RJL quantum body composition analysis machine. And what it looks at is, I know this looks complicated, but it basically looks at 4 things. It looks at the amount of fat one has, the amount of muscle one has in terms of lean, dry muscle mass, and the amount of skeletal muscle, and the amount of bone you have, and the amount of water you have. So fat, muscle, bone, and water, these 4 things. And the combination of all those things end up to be your body mass index. And then one more result that this machine does better than any other machine, it measures phase angle. And I'll talk about what phase angle is in just a second, but when it looks at your fat, it looks at your muscle mass, and it looks at your bone mass, and it looks at your water mass, and it looks at all these variables, it can tell you whether or not you're an average, in the average range, whether you're below average, or whether you're above average. So this first part is, it just measures the amount of fat that you have. And for most people, you want to be below average because most people are above average in fat content. So you actually want to be below average. And with this athlete, she is below average in the amount of fat that she has in her body. And when you look at the muscle mass, because she was a defensive back or a midfielder in soccer, she was pretty well built. And you can see that her muscle mass is showing that. But what's interesting is that her skeletal muscle mass, you would think that it would be higher than normal. She was actually pretty normal in skeletal muscle mass. And with many women in their 50s and 60s, because they're suffering from a lack in calcium deposition, you would normally see women in their 50s around here in terms of lower skeletal muscle mass. So this machine, by pulsing electricity in the body, can tell you a lot about what your body is doing and how it's doing. And to the effect that it comes out with this end measurement called phase angle, which is interesting because phase angle is the only scientific measurement agreed upon by scientists that can accurately measure what's called your biological age, your true biological age. And in the 70s, they were looking at phase angles at about a 7 for most people. And that was 40 years ago. But now we're finding that phase angles are averaging around a 6.0 to, phase angles go up to like a 10. And if you look at children back in the 70s, they were above a 10. But you look at children now, they're about anywhere from an 8 or a 9. And in 40 years, we've had an increase in electromagnetic frequency. We had, because of our cellular communications, we had a decrease in our nutrition because of a lot of processed foods. And we've also had a decrease in health and chronic illness for the last 40 years. So again, in terms of like true biological age, they're estimating now that this generation of children is going to be the first generation that's going to live less than their parents' generation. And it correlates with a decrease in phase angle. And this woman's phase angle turned out to be a 6.0. And when we were looking at women just before this study, we took phase angles of women in their 50s and 60s. We're finding phase angle down to like a 5. Yeah. And believe it or not, this phase angle is actually a corollary to death. And when you get a phase angle below a certain phase angle, like a 3.2, it almost always leads to irreversible death. So when they're looking at people in the hospital, for example, with chronic kidney failure or congestive heart failure, and above a 3.2 phase angle, they're still in a living state. But below a 3.2 phase angle, 100% of the time, these people ended up dying within the next 3 weeks. So phase angle has been a big determinant of your biological age. And also another thing about phase angle, it's very difficult to actually increase or decrease your phase angle because it's a long-term measure of your biological immortality and your biological health. Usually phase angles aren't able to be increased up or down until you change your nutrition, you change where you live, you change your belief systems, and within you can probably change your phase angle, but not change your phase angle by 1 point. We're talking about changing phase angle by 0.1. So this athlete, she had a phase angle of about a 6.0, and if she wanted to change it to maybe a 6.5 to a 6.8, it would probably she would need to have maybe about 6 months of detoxifying yourself, getting yourself into a cleaner environment, changing your belief system, and then changing your nutritional habits to maybe change your phase angle to about a 6.5 to a 6.6. So what ended up happening is that when we looked at the 2 elements of her body composition that we were very interested in, we wanted to look at her hydration levels, amount of water that she had in her body, and also her phase angle. Now, because she was drinking water, we weren't going to see any changes in her fat content, and we weren't going to see any changes in her muscle content. We weren't going to see any changes in her skeletal muscle mass. We were just going to see changes in her water composition, whether it's intracellular water or extracellular water. And what we found was very interesting because we did find that after 3 hours, her phase angle shifted from a 6.0 to a 6.3 without her fat being changed, without her muscle mass being changed, without her any change in skeletal muscle mass. The only changes was in her total body water composition. And we saw increases both in total body water. I mean, it went off the charts. Her total body water content went off the charts, was above normal. And we saw increases in her intracellular water and increases in her extracellular water. And what phase angle does is it kind of measures your body. Like each cell is like a big globule. And if you look at each cell like a basketball, and if you underinflate a basketball, it doesn't bounce very high. So it doesn't have a very high phase angle. But once you start inflating that basketball to its optimum inflation pressure, it bounces really nice and it performs very well. So we're theorizing that the increase of water inside the cell, intracellular cell, made that cell more like an inflated basketball. And that's why it increased her phase angle. And the phase angle is actually the angle by which this electrical pulse bounces off of these cellular membranes. And the higher angle that it bounces, it correlates to a healthier cell. And believe it or not, it increased from 6.0 to 6.3. And when we look at the graph of the increase, when she started this, it was actually, her phase angle was below 6.0, but it was like a 5.95 when she started. But 30 minutes later, when she was soaking in the water, it actually increased to a 6.4. But 3 hours later, it stabilized to about a 6.3. And finally, I looked at, are there any other incidences of her body composition that increased? And again, her fat composition didn't increase. Her skeletal bone composition didn't change, and her muscle mass didn't change. But what did change was her metabolic rate, her metabolism. So this machine was able to detect that her daily calorie expenditure actually increased from this amount to this amount. And after 3 hours, her body had increased the caloric expenditure of her body. And her basal metabolic rate, her BMR, was also increased after 3 hours. So this may explain the anecdotal evidence that people are saying that by drinking this water and soaking in this water, they're losing weight. So that was basically the effect of body composition and the effect of blood oxygen levels with this water. Thank you.